Imagine a ship so large it can't fit through most of the world's canals, carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil, run by a crew of barely 25 people, alone in open ocean for weeks at a time, with no help closer than days away. Now imagine that ship burns through tens of thousands of dollars in fuel every single day, has to navigate pirate-infested waters on certain routes, and if a single engine component fails mid-ocean, the nearest repair yard might be a week's sailing away. This isn't a rare voyage. This is a normal supertanker crossing, and the bill behind it will change how you think about the oil in your gas tank. Most people never think about how oil actually gets from one side of the planet to the other. It arrives at a gas station or in a delivery of home heating fuel, and the journey behind it stays completely invisible. That journey, in the vast majority of cases, happens aboard a supertanker, one of the largest moving objects ever built by humans. And keeping one of these ships running across an ocean is a business built on razor-thin margins, extreme operational risk, and a level of isolation that almost no other transportation industry has to deal with. Let's start with scale, because understanding the size of these ships is essential to understanding why they cost what they cost to operate. The largest class of oil tanker, known in the industry as a very large crude carrier, or in the very biggest category, an ultra-large crude carrier, can measure well over 300 meters in length, roughly the length of 3.5 football fields laid end to end, and can carry upwards of 2 million barrels of crude oil in a single voyage. These ships are so large that many of them physically cannot pass through the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal when fully loaded, forcing them onto longer routes around entire continents, adding days or even weeks to a voyage, specifically because of the ship's own size. Now let's talk about fuel, because this is the single largest recurring operational cost in the entire business. A supertanker's engine is one of the largest diesel engines ever built, capable of producing enough power to move hundreds of thousands of tons of ship and cargo across an ocean. And running an engine at that scale consumes an enormous quantity of fuel every single day. Depending on the ship's speed and the price of marine fuel at the time, daily fuel costs for a single supertanker can run into the tens of thousands of dollars, and a single voyage, which can take several weeks depending on the route, can rack up fuel expenses reaching well into the millions of dollars before the ship even arrives at its destination. This single cost category is so significant that shipping companies employ dedicated analysts whose entire job is calculating optimal speed, because traveling even slightly slower can save enormous amounts of fuel over a long voyage, while traveling faster gets the cargo to market sooner, and the balance between those two competing priorities can be worth millions of dollars per year across a company's fleet. Let's talk about the crew, because this is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of modern shipping. A ship this massive, worth potentially over $100 million and carrying a cargo worth even more, is typically operated by a crew of only around 20 to 25 people. That's not a staffing shortage, it's the result of decades of automation and engineering designed specifically to minimize crew size, because every additional crew member represents ongoing salary costs, food, accommodation, and insurance liability across a voyage that can last weeks. But that small crew size comes with an enormous responsibility. Those 25 people are entirely responsible for navigation, engine maintenance, safety systems, and emergency response, in an environment where the nearest outside help, in the event of a serious mechanical failure or medical emergency, can be days away by sea, and where evacuation, if it ever becomes necessary, is an extraordinarily complex and dangerous operation, given the size and cargo of the vessel involved. Now let's talk about maintenance, because keeping an engine this large running reliably across constant ocean voyages requires extensive engineering support. Supertankers undergo regular scheduled maintenance, but they also require periodic dry docking, a process where the ship is taken out of the water entirely, sometimes for weeks at a time, so that the hull can be inspected and repaired, the propeller and rudder systems serviced, and any underwater damage addressed that couldn't be identified or fixed while the ship was in active service. Dry docking a supertanker isn't a quick or cheap process. It can cost millions of dollars and take the ship completely out of revenue-generating service for the duration, which means shipping companies have to carefully schedule these maintenance periods to minimize the financial impact while still meeting the safety and regulatory inspection requirements every commercial vessel is subject to. Let's talk about insurance, because a vessel of this size, carrying cargo of this value, represents an enormous financial liability if something goes seriously wrong. Marine insurance for a supertanker has to cover the value of the ship itself, the value of the cargo, which for 2 million barrels of crude oil can represent well over $100 million depending on market prices, and third-party liability in case of an environmental disaster, because an oil spill from a vessel this size can cause billions of dollars in environmental damage and cleanup costs, along with severe reputational damage to the company operating the ship. That insurance cost is a significant recurring expense, and the premium a shipping company pays is directly tied to the ship's safety record, its age, and the specific routes it operates, because certain waterways carry meaningfully higher risk than others. Let's talk about piracy, because on certain shipping routes, this remains a genuine and expensive operational concern. Regions including parts of the Gulf of Aden and waters off the coast of West Africa have historically posed significant piracy risk to commercial shipping, and vessels transiting through these areas often have to implement additional security measures, hiring armed security teams, installing physical deterrents like razor wire along the hull, and in some cases, paying for coordinated naval escort through the highest risk zones. All of these measures represent additional operational cost layered directly onto a voyage, specifically because of the route taken, and shipping companies have to factor piracy risk directly into route planning, sometimes choosing longer, more expensive paths specifically to avoid the highest risk waters entirely. If you're fascinated by what it actually takes to keep the world's largest and most complex vessels running, hit subscribe, because every week we break down the hidden operational reality behind the systems that quietly keep the global economy moving. Let's talk about port costs, because loading and unloading a ship this size is itself a complex and expensive operation. Very few ports in the world are actually equipped to handle a fully loaded supertanker, because the ship's size requires deep water channels and specialized loading infrastructure that most standard ports simply don't have. As a result, many supertankers load and unload at specialized offshore terminals, essentially floating platforms connected to onshore infrastructure via pipeline, specifically designed to accommodate vessels too large for conventional port facilities. Using these specialized terminals involves its own fee structure, and the loading and unloading process itself, given the sheer volume of crude oil being transferred, can take a full day or more to complete safely, during which the ship isn't earning revenue through movement, but is still accumulating operational costs, crew wages, fuel for onboard systems, and terminal usage fees. Let's talk about what happens when something goes seriously wrong, because the financial and environmental stakes in this industry are genuinely enormous. A significant mechanical failure at sea, particularly involving the ship's main engine or steering systems, can leave a fully loaded supertanker adrift or unable to maneuver in open ocean, requiring emergency tugboat assistance that, depending on location, may take days to arrive and can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single rescue operation. And in the worst-case scenario, a hull breach resulting in an oil spill doesn't just represent a catastrophic environmental event. It can trigger billions of dollars in cleanup costs, legal liability, and regulatory fines, a risk so severe that the entire industry has invested heavily in double-hull construction and other safety engineering specifically designed to prevent this exact scenario, adding significant cost to every ship built in exchange for dramatically reducing the probability of the single most expensive failure mode in the entire business. Let's put a full voyage together, because that's where the real financial picture becomes clear. Between fuel costs that can reach millions of dollars for a single long-distance journey, crew wages for the voyage duration, insurance premiums calculated against the enormous value of both ship and cargo, port and terminal fees at both the loading and destination ports, and the ongoing amortized cost of periodic dry docking and maintenance, operating a single supertanker for one full round-trip voyage can easily cost several $million in total operational expense, independent of the actual purchase price of the crude oil being transported as cargo. So why does anyone operate ships this large, this expensive, and this operationally demanding? Because the economics of scale in ocean shipping are genuinely extraordinary. The cost per barrel to transport crude oil via a supertanker, even accounting for all of these enormous operational expenses, is dramatically lower than almost any alternative transportation method available for moving crude oil across intercontinental distances. A ship this size, despite its massive absolute operating costs, achieves such enormous efficiency per unit of cargo that it remains, by a significant margin, the cheapest way to move vast quantities of oil across the world's oceans, which is exactly why the global energy supply chain continues to depend on vessels this large, despite the genuine risk and expense involved in keeping them running. So the next time you fill up your car or think about where your home heating oil comes from, remember what might have brought it there. You're looking at the potential result of a ship the length of several football fields, crewed by barely 24 people, burning tens of thousands of dollars in fuel every single day, navigating some of the most isolated and occasionally dangerous stretches of ocean on the planet, carrying cargo worth well over $100 million, with insurance calculated against a genuinely catastrophic worst-case scenario. The fill-up takes 2 minutes. The voyage behind it takes weeks. Disclaimer: this content is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Operational costs are estimates based on available data.